Welcome, everybody, to what will be episode 200 in our, yay, boop, 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 somebody, emojis up, everybody, for what will be on our customer experience, customer centricity YouTube channel. For now, we are live in our webinar, and then, of course, our paid Patreon members will get this for 2 weeks before it goes live on YouTube. But, of course, today we have one of our favorite special guests, Larry. I do not have our Patreon thanks ready because I'm on my travel computer, but I just want to say a quick thanks to everybody who is supporting our Patreon at any of the paid levels, and those of you who've joined for free as well. You can check that out at patreon.com/CXCC. Also remember, these webinars are nearly weekly on some Mondays and some Wednesdays, so check it out. RSVP, share them out at cxcc.to/events. So I don't know if Larry needs an introduction, but I think I'll let him say a few words about who he is, and then we'll tell you he's got a new book out. Larry, who are you?
I'm a veteran UX researcher. I started off in Don Norman's cognitive science program, and he convinced me that I should be a freelancer, consultant. And so I started promoting user-centered design and working on the process and evolving the process. But I have to say that the process that Don Norman taught is still going strong. So that tells you something about how well designed that process was. And my new book, who some of you have seen already, is out finally. And no small thanks to Debbie Levitt. She, if it wasn't for her, the book wouldn't be done. And then I had a number of the folks that are joining today as editors, and a super editor, Linda Wang, contributed many hours to this. So if you like the book, give them credit, blame me for the content.
Love it. Yes. Please blame Larry. So I want to remind everybody, if you are curious about the Disruptive Research book, you can find it many places, but not everywhere, at deltacx.link/dr. You can find some links to Amazon, as well as my website, my Delta CX Media website, where you can download the PDF and EPUB, especially good for people who are having trouble finding where the print book can ship to their countries. I don't have it yet for sale where bookstores and libraries can order it. I am hoping to get that up in the next week or two. So if you go into your bookstore and you ask them to order it, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? This doesn't exist. So give me a couple of weeks to finish that up, and then it should be available there as well. So Larry, I guess let me throw you a couple of softballs while we see if anybody has questions about the book. But I would say, let me throw a not softball at you. Disruptive research. Why should we care? What's the difference?
So, everybody's familiar with the lean UX and design thinking and things like that. And I think a lot of us recognize that those programs have drifted away from the foundational elements of user-centered design. And so I'm kind of bringing it back, but I'm focusing on things that people have lost touch with, such as task analysis. But I've also introduced some things that have evolved over time in my practice that have been very influential in some of the many successes I've had. Most notably, designing for user knowledge or what they lack, that knowledge gap. And so that's what I want to talk about today. And you should care because the successes I've had are notable. Top website design, top medical device design, top enterprise design. I've even created small cottage industries by virtue of the designs that this process has promoted. So there's a lot to be said for how UCD has evolved in my practice. Now, this is just one other way of doing it. You don't have to follow this directly. You can evolve this to your needs. And to be honest, I have never done this process the same way twice because every project is so different. This is just a foundation that I start from.
Okay, great. So it's fluid and flexible, and we can learn all about it in the book. And some people might have seen some of the videos that we did back on the Delta CX YouTube channel. But the book goes into a lot more detail, I would say.
Yeah, and it's written down, and it's all in one place, and it flows nicely. And
Finally.
yeah, and I credit my editors for that. Thank you very much.
That's what we do. Thank you. Thanks to Linda. It's really Linda always saving the day. So you've sent us a Miro board. It is view only, but I'm going to put it in the chat here in case people want to follow along. I'm also sharing my screen so you can see this. As Larry goes, everybody, if you're watching live, please put your questions in the Google Meet. If you're watching this video later, like on YouTube, please put your questions as a YouTube comment. Remember, the likes and the comments really help us in the algorithm. So, Larry, I'm going to go over to your board and tell me, where do I go and what do you want to talk about?
Go to the right there, and
All
let's focus on that image there. You can start at the top.
right. Okay.
So what this is a representation of one of the aspects of this process that I like to comment on is it flows. You start with task analysis, and then you go down and create. You can go down, and then you go down and create a user knowledge profile, which we'll talk about in a little bit, so you don't have to focus too much on this right now. And that creates the foundation for your optimized task flow. Because when you optimize the task flow, what you're trying to do is solve the user's problem. So you need to understand the user before that. And then once you have the optimized flow, you go down and you can create an interface design for your product. So this all fits seamlessly together, which is quite unlike a lot of the stuff that people are doing now, because you create personas to start with, and typically those personas are so vague in general that they don't actually lend themselves to creating a website or an interface design. So I've tried to make this process so that it connects, it flows from the initial research to the task analysis, to the user profile, to the optimized task flow, and then to the interface design. And the reason we do this is, go to the next one, and I'm going to, so one of the things you have to recognize that every user is slightly different in their level of skill and knowledge. And so what you end up with is a skill and knowledge level across users that goes like that. The problem is you can't design for every user, because there may be a user down here that is not very familiar with the product and doesn't have a lot of skill. And you might have a user up here that is very knowledgeable. So, you know, a lot of designs try to incorporate instructions and things like that. But if you design to identify the user's knowledge gap, the difference between what they know and what they need to know but won't, which is the difference in the skill levels, then what you can do is create a design that raises the level of average skill and knowledge so that the base level is higher than the normal non-knowledge designed level. And so let me give you an example. So with the MP3 players in 2000, they were very clunky, very tech savvy. And what happened was they sold a lot to, oh, you're not seeing the design I just drew.
No, I'm not. What did you draw?
I drew a line in that. Why isn't it not sharing?
I don't know. I guess it's extremely secret, whatever you've just done in Miro.
Yeah, why is that? Maybe you need to
We don't have
refresh.
the knowledge to answer the question.
Yeah,
You want me to
maybe,
refresh?
yeah,
Okay. Uh, oh,
there it
you
is.
pressed start presentation. Oh, that's beautiful.
That's interesting.
Is that what it's supposed to look like?
Yeah, that's because I
Okay.
drew that by hand and I draw as well as I write.
For some reason, it said you started a presentation, so I don't know if that changed something about what Mira was doing, but yeah, we didn't have the knowledge to handle that. And Larry, I want to make sure you mention why knowledge gaps and issues aren't fixed with tutorials and tooltips and instructional text.
So those still rely on the user to understand and assimilate that information. And instructional text, I like to say that instructions are a symptom, not a solution. They indicate that something is not known by the user, and you're trying to fill that gap by putting instructions in there. And that means the user has to stop their task, read your instructions, try to understand what they're saying, and then figure out how to use the interface to complete their task again. And it just doesn't work. We've seen time and time again that the more instructions you have to put on a screen, the poorer the performance of the users tends to be. And so I like to try to get away from it and embed the knowledge into the design, which is our ultimate goal here. We actually started off calling the book Knowledge Design, but that was too generic and everything. So we ended up with Disruptive Research. And the reason it's disruptive is that it changes everything in your domain. You'll find that when you do this user knowledge profile, that your products and your competitors' products are not solving the user's problem. They're not bridging that knowledge gap. So anyway,
Hold on.
MP3.
I want to just jump in and mention a comment from Jessica who says, as an instructional designer who is often tapped to create that kind of content, I wholly agree. I do a lot of Band-Aid work.
That's good to hear from an instructional designer. Yeah, so with instructional design, you shouldn't be telling people how to hold a paintbrush. You should be telling them about art history and things like that. The things that matter in their cognition of what their task is, not about how to hold a paintbrush, for instance. That's just an analogy I heard many years ago, and I kind of like it. So let's get back to the MP3 player story. So with MP3 players, back in 2000, they were really clunky, hard to use and everything. And it got to the point where only the tech savvy folks were using it. And then Apple came along and they looked at it. So what are the steps of an MP3 player? You go to mp3.com and you find the music you want, download it into a directory that you've made. Then you go to another app like Music Maker or Winamp, and you create playlists, and then you use the proprietary software to upload it into the device, and then you get to finally play it. Well, when Apple looked at this, they said people don't necessarily have all of the tech savviness to do this. So they looked at it and said, okay, how can we streamline this? By tying together the Apple Store, iTunes, and the iPod, the user would go to iTunes, find the music, and when they selected it and paid for it, it automatically created a directory for them. And then when they went to charge up their iPod, it automatically uploaded, and it created 4 generic playlists: album, artist, genre, and decade. So all you had to do was pick the music and play it, and everything else was done for them. So that is how the user's knowledge gap was bridged. They put the knowledge of how to do this into the design. So now let's go ahead to the right on the thing and look at this and how do I identify that knowledge gap? So this is a task flow for ProFlowers. I like to use ProFlowers because it's a clean example. And when you look at this, if you scroll down, nowhere in there does it show that our user knows anything about flowers. As a matter of fact, we identify in the orange stickies that they don't know anything about flowers. So rather than creating personas and then doing the analysis, we do some analysis first and use that to inform the persona. So if we go to the right and look at Forgetful Frank there, these are what some of the things we identified in that task analysis. And all this is in the book, by the way. This is my favorite example. So Forgetful Frank, there's an element here. These are the common elements: objective, state of mind, trigger, outcome, common knowledge, missing knowledge, which identifies the knowledge gap, and then any artifacts that happen to come up in the task flow. So the objective for Forgetful Frank. So let me describe a little thing that happened. We were brought into this project by the folks that ran ProFlowers. And they said they didn't want a website design that looked like every other website. So we looked at a few websites. So we noticed something very interesting. They were all designed by florists. And what do florists do? They build bouquets. So these websites back in 1997 had the users build bouquets. Now, most of the users are men buying flowers for women. And that was just their market back then, right? And so rather than, just look at websites, we went out and watched people buy flowers in a flower shop. And we noticed that the process was pretty much the same throughout. But this is what happened. Guys would walk in, stand in front of the display case, look at the flowers. The clerk would come up and say, "Can I help you?" He says, "Yeah, I need some flowers." And the next question was the most telling insight that we got. What do you think that next question was? Well, I'll tell you. It wasn't what flowers did you want, what colors does your wife like, or anything. Is what did you do wrong? So,
Oops.
and so then the guys would say, "Oh, I forgot our anniversary," or "I forgot my wife's birthday." So
Again.
the trigger was he forgot his wife's birthday. And his desired outcome is for his wife to forgive him, to please his wife with his apology bouquet. So then the clerk would turn and say, "Well, here is a whole list, or a whole display case full of apology flowers. These are the ones you might like." And the guy then remembers that his wife likes the color purple. So he sees a purple bouquet, says, "I like that." And then the clerk might say something like, "Well, how sorry are you? $39.99, $49.99, or $79.99? So, and they would sell a lot of $79.99 flowers. So what we've understood is Frank doesn't know anything about flowers, doesn't know anything about bouquets. And there are some bouquets that are not right for a birthday or an apology. Some are appropriate for graduation, some are appropriate for sympathy, things like that. So you have to be careful which ones. He just wants to make sure he gets the right flowers for the occasion. So then, the guy would say, "My wife likes purple," so he'd take the purple bouquet. The point is, the knowledge gap that we have here is that Frank didn't know anything about flowers, and he wasn't about to stand there and read some instructional text about how to pick flowers for an occasion. And he doesn't even know how to build a bouquet. Frank barely knew anything more than roses. So his
Frank
bouquet
didn't even know his wife's birthday.
Yeah, how do you expect him to remember flowers? So, but then you capture some of the artifacts for this particular task. So this is the important aspect of these user knowledge profiles. They are very task specific. So the point I like to make is that somebody like Frank may not know anything about flowers, but he may be an expert chart maker in Microsoft Excel. So you can't use the same persona for all of the tasks that he's performing. Now, let's use that Microsoft Excel example. So somebody who is a chart wizard in Microsoft Excel doesn't mean that when they go to make a pivot table, they are an expert there either. So you can't make a general persona for an Excel user. You need to narrow it down to the specific task. So we might have chart wizard Kathy, who is very good at making charts, but pivot table Paul, who is not, who's the first time novice user of pivot tables. It may be the same person using that, that product, Excel, but they're going to change hats. They're going to be chart wizard Kathy or pivot table Paul. So think about the users as the user knowledge profile represents a hat that they're wearing, and they change hats with each role that they're playing or task that they're performing. So it's very task specific. So commonly you might have two different user profiles, one for a novice performing that task and one for an expert performing that task. And you also need to keep in mind the frequency of that task. So for instance, somebody who's doing something very infrequently, the example in the book is using the tax software, common to the US is called TurboTax. They use that once a year to pay, fill out the forms and pay their income tax. Whereas a tax professional is doing this every day, most of the year. You would capture that user knowledge profile differently for each of those two tasks. One's the infrequent user, the other is the frequent user. And that's because when you go to design or optimize the task flow and then design to those two user types for those tasks, you're going to find you need very different interfaces. One of them has to guide the user a little more, and the other one has to be very efficient to use, because the accountant does not want to use a wizard every time they do something. But the tax preparer who does it once a year will need a wizard because they won't otherwise know how to do this. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions. We've been doing 25-minute versions of our webinars. So, Larry, I didn't know how much stuff you wanted to go over. Otherwise, we could be wrapping up soon. You've got Ballfield Bobby. You've got a few other things in here. Did you want to speak to them while we see if there are questions about the book or the process?
Yes. So the next step after you create this user knowledge profile, or the hat, if you will, is to optimize the task flow by virtue of what you know about that user. So now you're designing the task flow for what we know about the user. So like I said before, you have these connected artifacts. You started off with some research, you created a preliminary task flow, and then you went and created a user knowledge profile, and you use that to go in and optimize the task flow. From the optimized task flow, you can design specific screens for the remaining green stickies. And this part is all described in the book, so I won't waste too much time. Now, let's go over to Ballfield Bobby, and I want to give another example. You can...
Yeah, I just want to mention quickly that just as a reminder to people that this technique is designed to be done after you have done research with your target audiences, preferably observational, because we usually, when we talk about this, Larry and I get questions about, well, can I do this after talking to a stakeholder? Can I do this in a workshop? Can we do this from what we think we know about users? Larry, do you want to say a few things about that?
That, as you like to say, that would just be guessing. And, guessing and basing everything on assumptions doesn't always work. You will be surprised at what you learn by going out and interviewing or observing users. I prefer observations, because what people say and do are so different that if you just ask them what they're doing or why they're doing something, you won't learn as much as if you actually observe them. So here's another example that's in the book, Ballfield Bobby. She's the manager of the playing fields in her county. And what's interesting, this is a real project. And what's interesting is they understand how to use the current technologies, and they understand, things about trying to keep the ball field playable. But when something novel comes up, such as a 3-day baseball tournament, and then they have to change their watering cycle, because if they just watered normally, the field would become muddy and unplayable and torn up for a 3-day tournament. Doing it on the weekends is fine, but a 3-day changes everything. What Bobby doesn't know are what are the most water efficient methods for watering the field, keeping it playable without making it muddy or letting it get too dry. And so we identify the knowledge gap here is how to water correctly. And so what this identified as an opportunity for the client was they actually have knowledge within the company that could promote to they could share with all of these irrigation managers how to keep a field playable using the least amount of water. And that knowledge is more valuable to the clients than the actual product. So when you consider these user knowledge profiles, you're looking at opportunities to satisfy their knowledge needs with your knowledge, because then you become a knowledge company. And this is in the book as well. The idea here is that your knowledge is worth more than just your product. Your product is just an avenue or a pipeline for sharing that knowledge. And the best part is your knowledge is not something that your competitors can copy. It's a defensible advantage.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat,
All right.
so let me send those back to you, and I will turn off my screen and put a big Larry on the screen. Our first question comes from, and I apologize if I pronounce anybody's names poorly, Olusegun, who says, should the knowledge profiles not only reflect knowledge gaps, but skill gaps and frequency of use?
Yes, the frequency of use you're going to capture as well. Yes, and the skill gap, I consider knowledge and skill as kind of like one artifact. But yes, and if you have a task that is knowledge and skill independent, then yes, you do want to capture the skill gap. See, this is where I'm suggesting this is not a cut and dried, perfect process. You can add these things into it and make it your own process. And you're going to evolve this process over time, much as I have. And then I ask you, once you've done that, please share it back to the rest of the community, because as they say, all ships rise with the tide. If you found a best practice approach to do something, please share it. I'm just doing this to get people to start doing things differently, and hopefully everybody will share.
We'll ask Sirako's question, and then Olu has a follow-up question. Sirako says, where and how do you address common workarounds that some users perform?
The common workarounds are an indication that there's a problem there. And a common workaround is something that people are less likely to tell you about if you just interview them, because they will have in their mind solved that problem. It's not a problem anymore. I have a workaround. But when you observe it and you see, oh, they're doing a workaround, that's a problem. So you can capture that in the task flow, and you can say, this is a workaround for this part of the task. And that's something you kind of want to circle and say, make sure you solve that problem. So good question.
Yeah, for those of you who've seen some of the screens of the sticky notes that we were just showing, the purple stickies usually reflect tools, knowledge, and workarounds. And when we're optimizing, we'll want to see, you don't want to leave the workarounds in. You want to see if you can optimize so that those are not needed, or whatever knowledge they were giving people has now been accounted for. Let me ask Olu's follow-up question. What if you don't have access to observational research, like your company doesn't prioritize resources for it? Can we not observe behavior from data analytics and know there's more assumptions or approximations in there?
Data analytics are a reflection of any current tools or products. And what you'll find is that if you just rely on those, you're going to end up automating current frustrations. If you take a look at some of my designs, you realize that they have completely changed industries. So, and that's by virtue of the observations. At the very least, go out and do your own observations, even if it's on your own time. And you can bring that back and say, look what I found. We need to do more of this. And people are likely going to say, oh, yeah, okay. but you have to do some type of an interview is the second best thing, but if you can do some type of observation. Now, the other thing too is recognizing that sometimes you can't observe things. So you may have to do a proxy observation. Like there was this medical product I couldn't actually watch people use because it was done in an operating environment, but I was able to go to veterinary hospitals and watch them work on animals using a very similar procedure, and I gained a lot of knowledge from that. So you have to do some type of observation or interview. You can't guess because you won't know.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to add there is that another downside to data and analytics is this says what people tend to do on our existing website, but it's very different to say, what does it look like people are doing on our existing website compared to what are they doing truly end to end? When we think about a process that people go through, being on your website is probably just a piece of that. There's definitely things that happened before, like, oh my gosh, I think I have to go buy a thing or log in and do something. And then there's always something that happens after. But if we just look at the data and analytics piece, not only do we miss that, but we miss all of the whys and hows. We just know people saw this page and they saw this page and they saw this page, but we would never be able to tell anybody why or how or the tools or the knowledge or the workarounds. So I would also have to say that data and analytics just aren't going to cut it. And you do have to try to find some way to at least speak to real users and learn about the whole end-to-end process if not observing it. And our last question is from Brandon. Do you apply, Larry's going to love this one, do you apply demographic elements to personas?
I haven't found a use for the demographics in personas. That's more of a marketing aspect, and so the marketers might use some of the demographics. But I'm looking at the knowledge basis of the users. I'm trying to understand what problems they're trying to solve, what tasks they're performing to solve those problems. What about those tasks requires a certain amount of knowledge that they don't have, the knowledge gap, and then how do we solve for that, bridge that knowledge gap? And I've never found demographics to be helpful in a persona, but that's just the way I do it. Now, every product is different. You may find it different, that demographics do apply. And if they do, fine, just make sure you include it. But I've never found a use for it.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I'm definitely a lot grumpier about demographics and personas because of the weird stuff I get because someone has put me in the 50-year-old woman bucket. And, when you think about Larry's knowledge design and task analysis examples, as I like to say, if I shop for a motorcycle the same way a 20-year-old man shops for a motorcycle, do we still need demographics? Does it matter if I'm a 50-year-old woman, or can we look at things more from people's behaviors and choices and decisions and actions rather than, oh, Debbie is white, or Debbie owns a home, or Debbie doesn't own a home, or I think we end up putting people in what I call lazy buckets because we assume that based on their age or income or something else, they must behave similarly. And if I can be a little controversial, and Larry might not agree, and that's fine, I also tend to believe that demographics are left over from a world in which we just wanted to sell things to white guys. So we just wanted to put them into different buckets of where did they live and how much money did they have and how many kids did they have. And Larry loves what kind of car did they drive. And, we thought that if we understood these different things about the white man, we would really know how to market to them. But I think that that has just I think it's an old-fashioned system that doesn't make as much sense as Larry's user profiles or behavioral typologies or anything that really focuses more on people's knowledge and behavior.
I agree with that.
Okay, I'm never too sure, but thank you.
But I have a house full of stuff that I bought because I fit the demographic.
Hey, white guy, what can we sell you? Yeah, and later on, white lady, or probably wife of some white man. I'm sure I didn't have my own identity and history until a certain point, based on stories from my family who are a generation older. But anyway, I know we should be wrapping up the webinar soon. Thanks for the great questions, Larry. What else you do want to mention? And of course, hold up the book. I don't have one. I can't hold it up.
So, as I had said before, and I want to reiterate this, this is just something to get you started to do something different. And hopefully the difference makes a difference. And I want to hear from people about what questions they have and what new ideas they have about how they would change the process for their product. Like I said, it's not perfect and could always be improved. And this is just a starting point.
Excellent. And Michelle says, super helpful. Thank you. I added the book to my Amazon wish list. Well, keep wishing, everybody. You can also get the PDF and EPUB on the website. Again, go to deltacx.link/DR. You'll find the Amazon links. You will find the PDF and EPUB for only about 15 American dollars. And we do not have an audiobook at this time. We're still considering how that would work, considering how heavily visual the book is. But hopefully in the future, we'll consider something like that. All right. Thanks again to everybody. I am going to stop the recording, and I hope people will check out our link, please. Okay, give me 1 second, Arun. Check out cxcc.to. Yes, /events for the other upcoming webinars. We're skipping this Wednesday, but we'll be back next Wednesday, and these are free. So I hope you'll join.
Thank you,
Thanks again.
everybody.
Thanks again, and see y'all soon.